thank you all for being here. My name is Charlie Moorcraft, and I was an operator, and I worked out in the field. And I worked in a gasoline blending. I made gasoline, you know. But actually, over the 27 years that I worked for Exxon, I think I did every job they ever had in a refinery. I started out as a mechanic, worked there for a couple of years, moved out of there, and worked on the barge docks. I loaded rail cars for a number of years. I worked conservation, you name the job, and I've done it in a refinery. I was a Teamster. We were Teamsters, and I was on the executive board. I was a steward. I was a delegate. I was on the bargaining team. The whole 9 yards, you know. But I was waged for almost all of my career there, you know. I did work there though for all those years. I think I was born working for a refinery. But for 15 of the 27 years that I worked for Exxon, I felt the same way about safety as I think a lot of you people do. People are pretty much the same all over. They really are. The accents might be a little bit different, and the customs might be a little bit different. The feelings are exactly the same. And how they feel about safety seems to be exactly the way that I felt. And how that was that accidents don't happen to me. Accidents happen to the other guy. I was never, ever overly concerned about safety. I mean, it just wasn't one of the top 10 things I'd worry about every day when I'd go up and and go into work. And I go into work at Exxon, and we have safety meetings like this all the time, you know. Weren't quite as elaborate as this, but we have safety meetings. And I'd go there, and usually I'd be sitting somewhere in the back of the room with my sunglasses on, so you couldn't tell whether I was asleep or not, you know. And somebody in management would get up there and give us a little pep talk or show us a video or something like that, you know. And usually they'd put up a list, kind of like the list you had here, of all the accidents we'd had in the last year or so, you know. And they'd say we had so many first aids and so many disabling injuries and so many recordable injuries. You know all those statistics they usually put up there. And usually, as I said, I'd be sitting there at the safety meeting, and I'd be sitting there, I'd be looking at the list, and I'm saying to myself, well, what do you expect? It's an oil company. You know, it's a chemical plant. If you're going to run a place like this, you're going to have accidents. It goes along with the job. It's inevitable that you're going to have an accident here and there. No matter what those safety people say about all accidents being preventable, get real. They're going to happen. It's just part of the job. It's part of the job. But how bad is it going to be anyway? I mean, really, how bad is it going to be? You know, it wasn't stupid. I knew that the refinery had the potential for very serious accidents. But I had already worked there for about 15 years at this point, and I knew my job. I knew it inside and out and upside down. And I knew how to take care of myself in a refinery. And nothing serious ever happened to me. Maybe a bump or a bruise here and there, or a stitch or two over the years, you know, something like that, or minor steam burn, but nothing any worse than that. And the other operators I work with, I can't remember anything that bad happening to them either, at least the guys on my unit. I think one of the worst things I can remember is going out to do a job one day with the assistant operator. His name was Ralph. And Ralph and I went out in one of the tank fields out there to do a job, and Ralph jumped over a load of pipe. And he tripped, and he fell, and he fractured his ankle. And we picked him up, and we carted him up to medical up there, you know, and they x-rayed it, and they said, yeah, it's fractured, and they sent him out to the hospital, and they put one of those little casts on his ankle, you know, one of those little sissy casts, the kind you can walk around on, you know. And they sent him home with that thing, and he was out sick with that for about 3 months, you know, 3 months, with pay, of course. He only needed about a month off, but like any good worker, he milked it for the other 2, you know. And he went to, and compensation awarded him like $2,000. And I can remember saying, wow, 3 months off with pay, $2,000? If that's the worst that's going to happen to me, I can deal with this, you know, I can deal with this. So I wasn't that, you know, concerned about safety, not at all. It just wasn't an issue for me. I was a good worker when I worked for Exxon, and at least I thought I was, and I guess they did too. And I can remember when I first started working for the company, I wanted to get ahead with them, you know, or at least stay out of trouble. And I felt that the way that you did that was to do your job, do it as quickly as possible, and as efficiently as possible. And if that meant you had to bypass a safety procedure here or there to get the job done, and so be it. You know, whatever it took to get the job done, I would do. To me, that was the bottom line. How you got it done made very, very little difference to me. Now, Exxon always preached that safety was number one. I mean, they always said that safety was number one. And they still do today. But I kind of figured that they had to say that, you know? I mean, what else are they going to say? Safety's number two? They got to say that. I figured that the government made them say that, or OSHA, or I guess in your case it's the FRA, or one of those regulatory agencies made them say that, you know? And I also kind of figured that the only reason they had these safety meetings all the time was because they probably got a tax write-off for it, you know? I didn't think that they were that, you know, quite that concerned about my safety and well-being. Not quite that concerned. And I also kind of figured that if push really came to shove, and production was going to actually suffer, or we weren't going to get the job done on schedule, that they would also expect me to do whatever was necessary, you know, to keep the place running. And again, if that meant bypassing a safety procedure, then so be it. Now, that's not what Exxon was saying. They meant that safety was number one. I just didn't believe them. You know, I just didn't believe them. So that's kind of the way I worked. You got the general idea. So on this particular day, it was a hot August day. It was the day before I was due to go on vacation. And as a matter of fact, my wife and children were already down at the Jersey Shore, at the beach. We'd rented a bungalow on the beach, and they were already down at the beach, and they were waiting for me to finish up on the 3 to 11 shift to start my vacation. And for whatever reason, and to this day I don't remember exactly what it was, they asked me if I'd work over on 11 to 7 shift. And I figured, what the hell? 11 to 7? No big bosses around really to bust my chops. I could do my job, do it as quick as possible, get it out of the way, and kind of coast for the rest of the night. I could head down to the beach in the morning, I'd sleep on the beach, I'd be with the wife and kids, I'd have a little extra overtime money in my pocket for the vacation. So I said, yeah, I'll work. And I did. And I guess it was about an hour later, I was back in the control house there, sitting at my desk with my feet up on the desk, you know, in that normal night shift position, you know, raring to go to work, you know, ready to spring into action on a moment's notice, you know. I can see some of you know that night shift position, huh? Well, anyway, I was in it, and I got a call on my radio to go out to one of the manifolds in the refinery to change out what was called hammer blanks or hammer blinds. Now, what that is, for anybody who's not familiar with that type of work, it's where a pipeline comes together in a refinery, and you either insert a solid piece of metal to stop the flow of hydrocarbon, or you pull it out to start the flow. Everybody kind of got that, right? You drop it in to stop it, and you pull it out to start it. Anyway, what they wanted me to do was to go out to this manifold and pull out one of these blanks. Now, this is a job I had done 1,000 times before. It wasn't something that was new to me or something I didn't know how to handle. It was an everyday job. But it was a job we complained about many times before. Because these particular type of valves were an older type. And this job always presented problems to us. They would always stick. It always took a big wrench to get these things to move. And they always leaked. And management had meant to change out these valves and replace them with a newer type. But it was a capital expenditure. It was time and material. It was one of these jobs that was on a list to get done. It never quite got done. It kept getting moved down on the priorities. You know, but I think they were going to do it on the next shutdown, but they hadn't quite gotten to it yet. What they did do, though, is they devised this procedure that you could follow to safely do this job without these valves leaking all over the place. But if you follow this procedure, as far as I was concerned, it would take you half the night to do this job. And there was no way in hell that I was going to spend half my night out there playing around with these valves. Besides, I knew every shortcut to take. I'd done it 1,000 times before. And so did the other operators. I mean, it was really no big deal. So that's what I planned on doing. So as I said, when I got the job, I wanted to get it out of the way as quick as I could. So I jumped into my truck, drove out to the manifold, jumped out, ran up on the stairs and up on the platform. I started working on the valves, and I started to open up. And as I started to open up, it started to leak, as I knew it would, you know. And I opened up a little more, and it leaked a little more and a little more. Oh, what was in the pipeline at this time was a chemical called isomerid, or isomfeed. That's a chemical that makes unleaded gasoline unleaded extra. It's an octane enhancer. It just gives gasoline a little extra boost. So it's real light stuff. It's not as light as, say, propane or butane, but light enough that when it leaks, you can see the vapors coming off it. So it's leaking and it's running down the side into a trough down below and then kind of draining into a sump. That's not the way it had to go. As I said, I could have followed the procedures and manifolded it to a closed system where it wouldn't be leaking all over the place, but it would have taken forever. You know, a lot more work, a lot more trouble, and a lot more valves. It was just much easier to dump it like this, you know? So I opened it up a little more and a little more, and it leaked a little more and a little more. Finally, I started to get a little concerned. It seemed like it was leaking a little more than normal. So I took my radio. We all carry radios in the refinery. And I called inside to the console, and I said, hey, you guys sure you got everything closed off on your end? Because they had some control over this job also. And they checked around the panel boards and the computers, you know, and they called back out, and they said, looks good in here. What's it look like out there? So again, I did a little tour of my area to make sure that everything was isolated and lined up properly. And it was. It was good enough. It wasn't the way the procedures said, but it was good enough for me. So I went back to opening up. And finally, the leak started to die down. I figured, great, I can finally pull this blank out and get this job over with. So I reached over and I grabbed the blank by the stem and I gave it a heave. And from somewhere in that pipeline to this day, I don't know where, I got a surge of material and it came gushing out and hit me smack in the eyes and it ran down all over the front of me. And I often wonder, to this day, if I had had safety glasses on at the time, would I have gotten out of there in time? I honestly don't know. See, I never bothered to wear safety glasses if I didn't have to, if I could get away with it, if there weren't any bosses around to tell me to put them on, you know. I didn't like safety glasses. I didn't like the way they fit. I didn't like the way they slid down my nose. I didn't like the way they were hot and uncomfortable. And to tell you the honest to God truth, I didn't like the way I looked in safety glasses. You know, it wasn't macho or cool or whatever way I thought you were supposed to look. Safety glasses was not it for me. So I never really bothered to wear them. But as a matter of fact, I never really cared that much about any of that safety equipment. I mean, if it was night shift and I happened to run out of the control house to do a job and I forgot my helmet, I wasn't too concerned about that. And when I drove back and forth to work, I never wore a seatbelt. I mean, I only lived 10 minutes away from the refinery. It wasn't like I had to drive cross country, you know, to get to work. You know how it is with those seatbelts. They wrinkle your clothes and they're uncomfortable. Uncomfortable as hell. Like most of that safety equipment. So I never really bothered to wear it. And as I said, I often wonder if I had had my glasses on that night, would I have gotten out of there in time? I really don't know. Because when I got hit in the eyes, I was temporarily blinded. And I wanted to take off running for a safety shower that was located maybe about a half a block away. And it took me a minute or two to get my eyes clear enough so I could see. And I finally got them clear, and I took off running across the platform and down the stairs. And as I ran down the stairs, I can remember running past my truck and looking at the truck and saying to myself, oh my God, that truck is running. See, there's a procedure in the refinery that says you never ever leave a vehicle running because it can become an ignition source. But that's another procedure I never quite followed. I was always jumping in and out of the truck to do a quick job, you know. As I ran past the truck, I knew it was going to happen. I could see it coming. I could feel it coming. I saw the vapors drifting over to the truck. I saw them hit the truck. I saw the truck blow, the whole area blow, and I blew with it. And it was just one great big ball of flames from head to toe. And you would think you would lose consciousness when something like that happens. But you don't at all. I can remember thinking as clearly then as I'm thinking right now. I can remember debating about what I should do. You know, should I drop and roll on the ground and try to suffocate the flames? But I knew that wouldn't work because I was covered with this chemical and it was all rocks in the area. It wasn't like it was dirt. And I just knew that wasn't going to do it. And I can remember thinking and debating, am I going to make it to that safety shower? Should I keep on running? Or should I just stop and die where I am? But I kept on running. And finally, out of the corner of my eye, underneath the pipe racks that ran along the roadway, I can remember seeing this puddle and looking at the puddle and saying to myself, boy, I hope that's water, you know, and not more ice on feed. So I took a flying dive for it, and I landed in it. Thank God it was water. And I rolled around. I was able to put myself out. Next thing I did was I jumped up and I reached my radio to put in an emergency call. But my radio was gone. It was blown off, along with a lot of my clothing. The next thing I did was I started to run around and try to control this fire. I don't remember any pain at this time. I guess you go into shock and your training takes over. And I started to run around and shut valves and turn on fire monitors and do whatever I could do just to contain this thing. Because all I could think about at this time, all I could think about, and you kind of got to picture this, was like I was in the eye of a hurricane, and everything around me was on fire. I mean, everything was on fire. And I can remember standing there and looking at it and saying to myself, my God, you know, look at this place, look at this. They're going to fire me for this one, you know. This is not one of my better days at Exxon, you know. It's definitely not going to look good on my resume, you know. So as I said, I'm running around, I'm trying to shut valves and do whatever I could do just to contain this thing. And it seemed like it took forever for the emergency squad, the fire department, and the rescue people to get to me. And I guess it did take longer than normal because they literally had to fight their way through the flames. And the first guy that came running through the flames was a real good friend of mine. He still is a good friend of mine. His name is Jose Veloso. He's an operator back there at what used to be Exxon. And Jose came running through, and he came running up to me, and he took one look at me. He said, Charlie, get in the ambulance, you know, get in the ambulance. And I'm saying, no, Jose, close this valve over here, shut this over there. And he's looking at me like I'm totally nuts, you know, and he's saying, no, Charlie, just get in that ambulance. So finally they brought out the gurney, and they kind of forced me down on it, face first like that. And they picked it up, and they slid it into the ambulance. And the EMT driver aboard that ambulance that night was also a good friend of mine. Her name was Sue. And Sue was a real professional. When they slid me into the ambulance, I can remember looking up at Sue. And she was all upset, and she had tears in her eyes. And that wasn't like Sue. It wasn't like her at all. I looked up at her, and I looked back down. And for the first time, I looked at my arms. And I could see that they were black. I mean, they were charcoal broiled. And they were swelling up and blistering and starting to ooze right in front of my eyes. And I could feel my face doing exactly the same thing. And I looked back up at Sue, and I said, I guess I'm not cute anymore. And she started to cry like hell. And that's kind of when I knew I was in some serious trouble. And that's kind of when the pain set in. Now, when you think about pain, think about being burned on the tip of your finger with a match or a cigarette. And then think about being burned over 45 to 50% of your body. The pain is excruciating. There's no way in hell I can possibly describe to you what that pain was like. I just kept screaming in that ambulance, please let me die, let me die. But of course they wouldn't, you know, they wouldn't. And they took me to the closest hospital to our facility, which was called Alexian Brothers Hospital, probably around 2 miles away. When they get you to the hospital, the first thing they do is they shoot you up with every kind of painkiller known to man. You know, they give you morphine and Demerol and whatever they can possibly give you for the pain, they give you. And as far as I'm concerned, it does absolutely nothing for the pain, absolutely nothing. And all I wanted to do was just die. That's all I wanted to do. I was actually praying to die. That's how bad it was. I wasn't afraid of dying. I really wasn't. I would have welcomed it. You know what I was afraid of, though? I was afraid I was going to die there. I was going to die there alone. And nobody was going to know it. You know, my family wasn't going to know it. And that frightened the hell out of me. And I could still talk at that time. My lungs hadn't shut down yet. And I can remember asking the nurses, you know, would you please, call my family, call my family. And they said, sure they would. And they went out and they tried to call my wife and children. But they were down at the beach house we had rented. And there was no telephone down there. They tried to call my mother and father who lived in a town nearby. But it was a hot August night. And they were in the bedroom asleep with the air conditioning on. They didn't hear the phone ringing out in the kitchen. They tried to call my brother and sister. And they were out partying someplace. And they couldn't get a hold of them. And the nurses came back and they said, we're sorry, we can't get anyone. And I said, my God, I'm going to die here, and nobody's going to know it. Nobody's going to know it. And that frightened the hell out of me. It was a very, very lonely feeling, the thought of dying all by yourself. But finally, Exxon sent a representative to Bayonne. That's the name of the town that I grew up in, and that's where my mother and father still lived. And the people from Exxon went to police headquarters, and they got the address of my parents' house. And they went down there at about 5 o'clock in the morning. And that's how my mother and father woke up that day, with the police pounding on the door, telling them they had to come, that their son was in an accident, and he was dying. I often wonder what that must have felt like. I'm a father today. The hell that I put my parents through. And for what, And for what? But finally, my mother and father were able to get a hold of my sister and brother, and they went and they got my wife and children, and everybody kind of converged on the hospital at about the same time. And what they were doing to me in the hospital at this time was anything they could possibly do just to keep me alive. Alexian Brothers Hospital was not a burn unit, so they did the next best thing they could. They had me in an intensive care unit. And basically, it was this great big glassed-in room. And they had me in there, and they had me hooked up to every kind of instrument and monitor you can possibly imagine. I had tubes running into me and out of me, oxygen and IVs, and anything they could do just to keep me alive, they were doing there. And at one point there, when you get burned, your whole body swells up, unbelievably, just blows up, totally out of proportion. And at one point there, this arm in particular was swollen up to like twice its normal size. Now, I'm not exaggerating when I say that. It was just like that. And the swelling was choking off the blood to a major artery, so they had to relieve the pressure. So as I lay there, they just took a scalpel and they slit my arm from one end to the other. And the blood just shot all over the room, and the pain was just horrendous, horrendous. And they couldn't give me any more painkillers because they're afraid I would just overdose. And they couldn't give me an anesthesia because they're afraid I just wouldn't wake up again. And I had to lay there and watch them do all this. And as I said, it was just horrible. It was horrible. And that's about the time my whole family arrived at the hospital when all this was going on. You want to see that scene, But along with my family, all of these doctors got there. I don't know where they got all of these doctors from on such short notice. Because not only were there doctors there, obviously, from Alexian Brothers Hospital, but there were also doctors there from Exxon, and there were doctors there from St. Barnabas Burn Unit. St. Barnabas happens to be one of the better burn hospitals in the country. It's located in Livingston, New Jersey. And all these doctors got into this great big argument. They called it a discussion. I called it an argument about what to do with me. See, some doctors felt that if I stayed in Alexian Brothers Hospital, I would die there because they didn't have the facilities to take care of me. And other doctors felt that if they transferred me to St. Barnabas Burn Unit, I would die on the way. So as I'm laying there, they're arguing back and forth, die here, die there. And I'm laying there watching the debate about where I'm going to die, So finally one of them said, well, let's take this discussion out of the room. And so they did. But they all left, everybody, the whole entourage, they all marched out of the room. And they're all on the other side of this, like, glassed-in partition, arguing about where I'm going to die. And as I'm laying there, I don't want to tell you that I had any out-of-body experiences or I saw any white lights or anything like that, because I don't remember anything quite like that. What I do remember, and this is always hard for me to explain, is as many times as I've tried to explain it as well as I remember it, I remember everything just closing in around me. Just closing in. I don't remember any pain at this time, any pain at all, and it's just everything closing in. It felt like my body was shutting down, but just like one piece at a time. I've told people before, it was like somebody was inside of me, just shutting off switches, and just closing me down. I don't remember any pain, as I said, at all. And I remember being very aware of what was going on around me, very aware. I mean, I knew I wasn't breathing. I knew it. I can remember thinking to myself that I should be signaling those people who are out there arguing about where I'm going to die, that it's here, and it's now, But apparently somebody finally saw me, and from what they tell me, they came running back in, and this area is a little vague for obvious reasons, but they gave me a needle in the chest, and they jump-started me, and they did whatever they had to do to get me going again. And they made the decision then that as soon as they could stabilize me, they were going to transfer me to St. Barnabas burn unit, because I was only going to die where I was. They just didn't have the facilities to take care of me, you know. And they finally did transfer me, and sometime later on that night, or I guess it was early in the morning, you know. And when they get to St. Barnabas Hospital, the burn unit itself is located underground, because that's where the hyperbaric chamber is and some of the other equipment they need to take care of burn victims. And they take the ambulance and they back it down this big long ramp to this loading dock. It's a regular loading dock. And they take down on a special stretcher they have. And they have this overhead crane that comes out and it comes down and it picks you up and a stretcher up and it takes you inside to this room. It's called the tanking room. And what this room is, it's full of these great big stainless steel tanks. They're called Hubbard tanks. They're like great big bathtubs, you know. And they're full of water, Clorox, and different antibiotics. And they take you in there in that crane, and they lower you down into those tanks. Now remember before I told you about the pain of being burned over 45 to 50% of your body? Well, that pain is nothing, nothing, compared to the pain of being lowered down into those tanks. Because what they have to do in there, it's called debriding. And what that is they have to peel off all of the dead skin. Unfortunately, when they do that, all of the live skin comes with it, and the nerve endings come with it. And the screams in that tanking room are horrendous, horrendous. My own screams and the screams of the other people that were in there. St. Barnabas Hospital had facilities for 12 burn victims. 12 people, just like you and I. 12 people who said that accidents don't happen to them. Accidents happen to the other guy. Barnabas was full when I was in there. 9 of those people died. 3 of us walked out of there. I was one of the lucky ones, if you want to call this luck. And do you know if you called up St. Barnabas Hospital right now, you'd find out that that hospital's full, right now. And what's worse, there's a waiting list to get in there. You imagine that, a waiting list to get into a burn hospital of people just like you and I, no different than you and I. Some of the people that were in the burn hospital when I was in there were people like my roommate in there. His name was Lewis Washington. And Lewis was a young guy, and Lewis was in a motorcycle accident. He had run a stop sign on his motorcycle, and he got into a crash with a car, and the gasoline tank on the motorcycle ruptured and exploded. And that's how Lewis went up. There was another guy in there who was a regular family guy, and he was going to have a barbecue in his backyard, and he went outside to light his gas grill. He turned on the grill, and he forgot his matches. He was running back inside to get the matches, hadn't turned the grill off, came running back out again and struck a match, and of course it flashed, and he went up. Then there was this young lady. I didn't know her, but I knew her family really well. They grew up in the same town that I grew up in. And she was going to college. She was about 17 or 18 years old. And she was pledging a sorority. And they were having this dance. It was like a costume dance or a costume ball. And they had dressed her up as a mummy, and they wrapped her up in gauze and rags from head to toe. And she went off to the dance, and somebody was lighting a cigarette. And she backed up into the match. And she went up. And she was burned over 90% of her body. 90%. And that poor girl lived. She lived. She would have been much, much better off dead. Believe me when I tell you, she would have been much better off dead. And I know her today. And I still feel that way. And I know if you asked her that question, you get the same answer. The same answer. The hell did those people go through? And for what? And for what? And again, they're people just like you and I. And at night, when they would finally take you back to your room at night, when they got finished with the operations they had to do and the tanking and the debriding, there was no way in hell you could sleep. No way. Because of the pain and the screams and the crying. But most of all, because of the thought that in the morning, You had to go back down into that tank. See, every day you're in a burn unit, every single day, you have to go into that tank for that debriding. I was in a burn unit for 3 months. And for 3 months, every single day, and that debriding went on, and those screams went on and on. I swear I can still hear those screams today. But finally, after that 3-month period, they finally decided to transfer me up to the 4th floor of the hospital. And that's called a step-down floor. And that's where they try to bring you back to somewhat of a normal hospital life. I don't want to say a normal life, but a normal hospital life. Because when you're in the burn unit, the only thing they do down there besides the tanking and the debriding are the life-saving operations, and I had plenty of them. Up on the 4th floor, they do a lot of the other operations, a lot of bone operations. I was burned right to the bone, so they had to do a lot of orthopedic operations, you know, a lot of skin grafts, not the cosmetic kinds. They don't do cosmetics till much, much later on. Operations just to get skin onto your body, and a lot of physical therapy, extensive physical therapy. When you get burned, your whole body literally just seizes up, it just locks up. And they have to come up there and force things to move. Now, believe me, you don't want to move. You know, they force your arms and your legs to move, and every day they come up there and they push and they pull on them, and sometimes I think that pain was almost as bad as the other pain, you know. And at one point there, this arm in particular was locked in this position. I couldn't straighten it out, or I couldn't bend it, you know. It was just locked there. As you can see, I still can't straighten it out all the way, you know. But it used to be just like that. And they operate on the elbow, and they rebuilt the elbow, and they moved muscles around, and it still wouldn't work. It just wasn't going anyplace. So they decided they were going to have to send me out to this rehabilitation hospital. And they did. They did. They sent me to this hospital called Kessler Rehab. It's one of the worst hospitals I've ever been in my life, by far the worst. And I've been in hospitals all over the country, in New York, in California, in Texas, Jersey, all over. And this one's by far the worst. And that wasn't because of the facility or the doctors or the nurses or anything like that. It wasn't because of that at all. It was because of the other people that were in that hospital, the other patients. Again, they were people just like you and I. No different than you and I. A lot less fortunate than you and I, but certainly no different. My roommate in that hospital was also a young guy and also in a motorcycle accident. He was at a party. He was about 19 years old. And he left the party and he was slightly intoxicated. And he came out and he jumped on his motorcycle and he took off. And he wound up dumping the bike about a mile down the road. And he was quadriplegic as a result of that accident. And he was in that hospital learning how to get around one of those wheelchairs you drive with your chin. That's all he could move is from his neck up. There was another guy in there who was very, very much like me, and he didn't believe in any safety equipment either, especially around the home. I mean, what's going to happen there that's so bad, you know? And he was down in his basement working on his hobby. He used to make model boats and model airplanes. And he was down in his basement. He had this little grinding wheel set up down there. And he was grinding away. And he didn't have any glasses or shields on or anything like that, you know. And actually, it's a classic accident. There was a flaw or a crack in the grinding wheel. And as he was working there, the wheel blew apart. And the fragments got him in both eyes. And he was blinded as a result of that accident. And he was in that hospital learning how to get around one of those canes with the red and white tips on them. Remember before I said to you that safety equipment is uncomfortable and seatbelts are uncomfortable? You know what's uncomfortable? Learning how to get around for the rest of your life in one of those wheelchairs you drive with your chin. That's uncomfortable. But learning how to get around for the rest of your life in one of those canes with the red and white tips on them. That's uncomfortable. That's damned uncomfortable. Safety equipment uncomfortable. Seatbelts uncomfortable. Give me a break. Nothing at all uncomfortable about that. Nothing uncomfortable about that. And you know what else is uncomfortable? In the last, I guess, year I've been doing this presentation, a lot of companies have asked me to come into their facilities to talk about flame retardant clothing because there's some new regulations coming out in the chemical industry concerning that. And the first thing people say to me is, "Hey, Charlie, did you have flame retardant clothing on that night?" And I did. I did have flame retardant clothing, kind of like what your welders wear, you know. But I didn't like wearing that stuff because it was hot and uncomfortable, and it kind of looked wimpy, you know. So I didn't like wearing it, but I did wear it. But I was one of those guys who was always out in the field working, and I had my sleeves rolled up, you know. Some boss was forever coming out there and saying, "Hey, Charlie, roll your sleeves down." And I'd roll them down, you know. He'd leave, I'd roll them back up again. What the hell did he know? He didn't have to work out here in the heat, you know, in the summertime. And so I always had them rolled up. So it finally got to the point where I took one of my shirts, my older shirts, and I cut the sleeves off. And I made these nice short sleeve shirts out of them. And I used to wear them on a night shift when the temperature was like 100 degrees and the humidity was 120. You know those hot, muggy nights. So that's what I had on that night, those nice short sleeve shirts. So I thought I'd show you the result of that little escapade, you know, and what it looks like when you get burned. I hope you can all see this, but I guess what the... You guys all see the scars there? Can you see that? And can you see where the scars stop? That's where I cut the sleeves off. These scars are what's uncomfortable today. This is what's uncomfortable today. Do you know how many times I've stood in front of a mirror and looked at that and said, why? Why the hell did I do that? Just so I could be comfortable and work for a couple of hours? Or so I could look macho and cool? And now for the rest of my life, I have to look at them. So it's kind of up to you what you do about your safety equipment, you know? And that holds true for any safety equipment. I can remember so many times being out and doing a job someplace and I wouldn't have my helmet on. And some boss coming out and saying, "Hey, Charlie, get your helmet on." I'd be looking at him and saying to him, "Why? What's going to happen out here? Was a bird going to get me?" Nothing's going to happen here. Nothing ever did. Until that night. Until that night. So I said, it's up to you what you do about your safety equipment. You know, eye protection, hearing protection, any of it. It's your choice. This was mine. This was mine. So people have said to me, "Well, Charlie, how'd you manage to get burned the rest of the way if you had all this flame retardant clothing on?" Well, luckily I had it on because when I turned to look at the truck, that's when I caught the blast from the left. And the blast came across, and I caught it mostly from the back. And my clothing just shredded in the back from the force of the blast. So I got burned in the back, all in between. And on the front, wherever the chemical was, you know, because it supported combustion. That's how I got burned the rest of the way. But the flame retardant clothing saved my life. I'd be dead if I hadn't had it on. I'd be dead. So finally, after I don't know how many months I was in that rehabilitation hospital. Too many months. Too many months. I was trying to tell people why I hated that hospital so much. And the best way is for me to tell you that they used to take me back to my room at night when they'd finished with my therapy. And I'd get back to the room, and that kid, that 19-year-old quadriplegic, he'd be laying in the bed next to me crying. And I never knew what to say to him. I mean, what the hell do you say to a kid who's 19 years old? He's going to spend the rest of his life driving a wheelchair around with his chin. What do you say to him? I mean, everything's going to be all right? Or what do you say to the guy who's blind and never going to see his kids again because he didn't have safety glasses on? What do you say to them? I didn't know. I didn't know, and I felt so bad for those people. I just couldn't wait to get out of there. So they finally sent me back to St. Barnabas Hospital, and that's where they did the majority of my plastic surgery, or my cosmetic surgery. What you see here is some 45 to 50 operations later. I really don't know. I lost track a long time ago. This is all new. This is a new eye. I can see it in my eye, but everything underneath it was blown away. My ear is all rebuilt. My nose is rebuilt. My mouth was extensively rebuilt. Because when I was running in the fire, I remember I was trying to hold my breath so I didn't suck in the flames and destroy my lungs. And I couldn't do it. And I finally took a breath and I totally wiped out my mouth. And as a matter of fact, I was just in the hospital over Christmas having my mouth re-operated on, and all underneath here. That's why I'm still kind of swollen, if you can see the swelling, you know. And it's a new chin, by the way. It's plastic. I got this for Christmas. I hope everybody likes my new chin, you know. I've had more operations than Michael Jackson. I used to look like Tom Cruise, but this is what I look like today, you know. At least that's what I keep telling my wife. She doesn't believe it either, you know. And the operations just went on and on and on. And it seems like they're just never, ever going to end. Never going to end. And finally, one day, the doctors came into the hospital to see me. And they said they were finally going to let me out of the hospital for the first time in between operations. My brother was getting married, and he had asked me to be in the wedding party. And they were going to let me out of the hospital to go to that wedding. You want to see those wedding pictures? My God. Because before I could leave the hospital, they told me about this suit that I had to wear. It's called the Jope suit. I don't know if anybody's ever seen pictures of a burn victim before or of a burn victim. There's a suit you have to wear that goes literally from head to toe, including a mask for your face. You know, it's kind of like one of those ski masks, you know. Not a sexy mask like the Phantom of the Opera either. It's an ugly, ugly brown mask, you know. It's supposed to be flesh color, but it's really not. And it's made of this elastic material. It's real, real tight. It's used to keep down scarring and infection. And you have to wear that suit for 1 solid year, and that mask. I hated it with a passion, You couldn't take it off. I hated it. Because I'd be out of the hospital now in between operations. I still had a life, I still had family, I still had responsibilities in places I had to go to. Like my children at school, my brother's wedding. And every place I went, I had to wear that suit, that mask. And I'd walk around like Frankenstein. And people would stare at me and gawk at me. And I hated it. And it finally got to the point where they had to give me this little card to carry around with me that said that I was medically authorized to wear this suit and this mask. And I had to carry this card with me no matter where I went. Because if I went any place with this on, think about it now, you know, like a bank, you know, they'd shoot your ass, you know. So, it's the truth. I used to have to go to the bank in a town that I grew up in, First Savings. I can remember it so well. I used to have to go there and knock on the window and get the attention of the guard, pray to him, and turn around and shoot me, you know, make his day for him. And he'd come out and he'd get me. And he'd escort me into the bank. And he'd have to stand there and talk to me. So the other people didn't panic. And I hated it because they'd all stare. And I hated it when I finally got that suit off. I went back to work at Exxon, and I'd go into the locker room and get changed into my work clothes. I hated it when the guys would stare at the scars. I know they didn't mean anything by it, but it bothered me, you know, it bothered me. And it still bothers me today. You know, I love doing what I do today. I love traveling all across the country. I love speaking to people, meeting new people. I love just about everything about it. The downside of this, though, is that I'm away from home an awful lot. And I miss my wife, you know. I'm one of those guys who's truly in love with his wife. You know, I've got this wonderful, wonderful lady I'm married to. And I miss her. When I finally do get home to see her at night, when I put my arms around her, all I see are those scars. That's all I see. She says she doesn't see them. But I sure as hell do, you know. I sure as hell do. And it just goes on and on and on like that. And for what? And for what? You know, you ever read about an accident in the paper? Any accident. It doesn't have to be a spectacular accident. It doesn't have to be a fire, an explosion in a refinery. You don't have to take out half a refinery. Any accident. Accident on your job or at home and in a car. And you read about an accident and it says, so-and-so is in a hospital and they're in satisfactory condition. You figure, wow, it's too bad they got hurt. But thank God they'll be fine when they come home from the hospital. You know, they'll be fine. Never tells you about what happens when the person comes home from the hospital. Or more so, what happens to the family or loved ones. Because we all got family, we all have loved ones. And I'm certainly no different than you are. Remember that first day in the hospital, I told you about my whole family converging on the hospital at about the same time? Well, actually, the first person to get there that day was my mother. And my mother was the most wonderful lady that ever walked the face of this earth. And I guess everybody feels that way about their mother, you know, but mine was, she was real special. She was a real special woman. She died about 2 years ago, and I miss her something terrible. I don't think there's a day that goes by that I don't think about that lady. And she was the first one to get there, and she came running in, and she took one look at me, and she said, "Oh, thank God. That's not my son." My own mother didn't recognize me. And then she spent years crying herself to sleep at night, worrying about me. Remember I told you about them taking me back to my room at night when they get finished with the tanking and the debriding? When they get me back to that room, that lady was always there. Always there. She never left my side, not once. And I never would have made it without her. Never would have made it without her. And I don't care if you call me a mama's boy or what. I needed her there. I truly needed her there. The hell that I put her through. My father was also an incredible guy. I used to say I was lucky with the parents I had. It's the wrong term. I was blessed. I was truly blessed. My father was a regular blue-collar worker. My father always had two jobs, though. He was always out there hustling a buck, you know, just so he could give us kids whatever we wanted. And we were spoiled brats when I think back about it today, you know. My father was real proud of me, especially when I was in school. And that's not because I was this great student, you know, far from it. But I was pretty good in athletics, you know. As a matter of fact, I was real good in football. And he was real proud of that. And he was the type of guy, he used to sneak out of his second job whenever he could around dinner time, just to get down to the practice field to watch us kids practice. And when it was a game, he was never ever content to be up in the stands along with the other parents. He always managed to sneak out along the sidelines where the coaches were. You know, I don't know how he ever always did it, but he was always there. He was always cheering louder than anybody else in the stadium for me, you know. I always figured one of these days I was going to make a tackle, and I'd roll over and my father would be next to me helping me out. You know, it's the kind of guy he was in the relationship we had. And my father came in to see me that day, and when he came in to see me, I was dying. And I wanted to die, you know. I'd thoroughly given up on living. I just given up. I quit, you know. And he came in there and he took one look at me and he said, "Hang in there. Hang in there, son. I know you. I know you can make it." And damn it, I wanted to make it then. Because I wanted that man to be proud of me. And I hung in there with everything I had. Everything. And I did make it, you know. I did make it. And I didn't get to see my father again for some time after that. And they told me my father couldn't come in to see me because he had a cold and they were concerned about the germs. And I bought that. I bought that for the longest time. But actually what happened was my father walked out of the hospital that day and he had a heart attack right in their parking lot. He followed that with a stroke and he was never the same again. He died soon after that. My marriage went right down the drain, right down the drain. And I don't want to give you the impression it was my ex-wife that she left me because of the scars or anything like that. It wasn't her at all. It was me. It was me all the way. I didn't handle the accident very well. I didn't handle the pain very well, the emotion very well. I didn't handle any of it very well. But in my defense, I'm not sure there is a way to handle it, you know. I did the best I could, but I made an awful lot of mistakes. My daughters, I have two beautiful daughters, Dana and Jennifer. Two kids that are as different as day and night. I don't know how two kids can be sisters and be so different. And they're definitely sisters. One is as outgoing could be. That's Jennifer, the younger one. And the older one, Dana, is as quiet and sensitive as can be. When I first started doing these presentations, I used to say that Jennifer was fine. That she was too young at the time of the accident for anything that bothered her. And that nothing bothers Jennifer. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I guess a little over a year ago now that Jennifer had to start therapy as a direct result of this accident. Direct result of this accident. My older daughter, Dana, the quiet, sensitive one, she went from a straight-A student to failing every single subject to an attempted suicide. Everything I had, I lost. In one split second. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. Just like that. Just like that. And for what? And for what? So what's the reason for my coming here to tell you all this? What's the purpose for all this? The reason is that you can't afford an accident like this. Your families can't afford an accident like this. I get so concerned when I go to a facility, any facility, that people are going to sit there and say, well, thank God that'll never happen to me. I don't work in an oil refinery. Or I don't work with those type of chemicals. Or I don't work on that type of a job. The fact that I work in an oil refinery with those chemicals and that job had absolutely nothing to do with this accident. Nothing. What caused this accident was my attitude towards safety. My attitude towards safety. And if you have the same attitude towards safety that I had, these things will happen to you. Same thing will happen to you. The circumstances may be different, but the feelings are exactly the same. And believe me, the feelings of your loved ones are exactly the same. I am no different than you are. No different. If you go out there to do your job and you fail to wear the proper protective equipment or you fail to follow the procedures, same thing will eventually happen to you. Same thing. Or if you're home working around the house and you fail to follow safe work practices, same thing. Or when you leave here today to go home and you get in your cars, if you elect not to put a seatbelt on and you get into an accident, no matter whose fault it is, same exact thing will happen to you. Different circumstances, same feelings. Same feelings. You know, there were so many things that could have been done that day to prevent this accident. So many things. If I had shut the truck off, it probably wouldn't have happened. If I had had my safety glasses on, I probably would have gotten out of there in time. If I followed the procedures, it definitely wouldn't have happened. Yeah, you can say that if Exxon had changed the valves out, it wouldn't have happened. But they had developed this procedure that you could follow to safely do this job. And it was my responsibility to follow those procedures. My responsibility. So many people think that it's the responsibility of management or the responsibility of the safety department to keep them safe. You imagine that. They expect other people to keep them safe. It's our responsibility. Our responsibility. We've got to start accepting responsibility for our own safety and stop looking for other people to keep us safe. We've got to start caring about one another and taking care of one another. There is nothing macho about an accident. Nothing. You know the first thing that happens when an accident occurs? The first thing, and I don't care where it is or what type of an accident it is that people run around and they look for somebody to blame. You know, they either blame management or the worker, their next-door neighbor, or the guy in the car lane next to them. They blame somebody for the accident. What difference does it make whose fault it is? Who cares whose fault it is? Because when you're laying there in that hospital bed screaming in pain, when it's your mother crying herself to sleep at night, when it's your daughter trying to overdose on pills, it's you. You're the one. You're the one. please, please, everybody deserves a future. Please, don't let it happen to you. Thank you very much.